Thanks for the opportunity to talk today. In all the times that I've done public presentations, I'm going to be quite honest, this is probably the toughest that I've ever had to get ready for, to prepare for. Kind of an uncomfortable topic. And I bring it up simply by beginning looking at the Department of Defense definition of sexual assault. Because one of the problems I had when I first started looking at this issue is, what is the definition? When I think assault, I think of somebody hitting something. I think of physical violence. But we have to realize that the problem goes much broader than that. As you read through here, I was just thinking of starting this conversation today with you by coming up and reading these words. And I was thinking how incredibly uncomfortable that would feel to have to read this to you to explain what it is we're here to talk about today. And it is an uncomfortable topic. But what I want to do is spend a little bit of time not blaming necessarily, but I want to look at what things that we can do, what kind of controls that we have, what sort of influence do you have to be able to help this problem, to help the victims. And that's the last time I'm going to use that word. From here on, we'll call them survivors. And you have to realize, in a crowd the size we have in here today, on average, there are between 60 and 100 survivors of sexual assault by this definition. So when we talk about it, it's a very sensitive topic. But the good news is that we can do something about it. And that's what I'm here to talk with you about today, is what kind of controls do we have? What sort of influence do you have when it comes to the topic of sexual assault? So that's what we're here today, is to come up with a positive thing. You heard General Williams talk, giving us our challenge. Here are the things you want to look at. But I want to give you some things to consider. As we go through, these are just things that you'll have available in your arsenal to be able to deal with the problem. Now, most people sitting in this room probably think, I've never had anything to do with sexual assault. I don't know anybody who has ever done it. I don't know any victims of it. I'm just a bystander in the whole topic. It's kind of interesting as you get talking about these things, as you get talking to people, how many folks have actually been involved with this. As when we did the wing commander fly-in, General Williams asked me to talk to the wing commanders, and what I did is I started talking to people, one-on-one. The example is when I was on a flight a couple of weeks ago, heading across country. So it was about a 2.5 hour long flight, sitting there, and a young girl comes and sits in the middle seat in the aisle row there. And of course, I start talking. So who are you? Where are you going? Yeah, I'm that guy. All right, so I start talking, and at one point, found out that she's a young airman in the Air Force. So it was interesting. So I talked, career-wise, what does she do? She used to be in a fighter squadron. She was on her way to tech training to work a new career field. I said, well, we've got 2.5 hours on the plane. Let's talk about sexual assault in the Air Force. You should have seen the look on her face when I first said that. I said, is it a problem? And the first answer was, no, it's not. I said, okay, so let's talk about some of these experiences that you've had. And it was really interesting as we got discussing this to learn about the inappropriate relationships, how one of her peers was having an affair with one of the supervisors, and how she was getting special treatment, and pretty soon it was interesting to kind of see her eyes light up of, hey, wow, maybe this is a bigger problem than I thought. In other words, simply answering the question of, it isn't a problem, wasn't really an accurate answer. And I think that's true for most people. Most people who are survivors of sexual assault probably don't see themselves by this definition. Certainly most people who perpetrate the crime of sexual assault would never define themselves as a perpetrator of sexual assault. So part of the problem we have to begin with is just getting our arms around the definition of what we're talking about. We'll talk about, if we go back to this definition, it's just talking about intimidation. It's talking about it's wide range of different things, not just physical violence that we're talking about today. So let's open our minds and think about this a little bit as we go. We have to realize that in a crowd this size, on average, we're going to have 60 to 100, like I said, survivors of sexual assault in a group this size. And it's amazing. Like I said, from my discussions, I think that number might even be higher. The problem that we have, a lot of folks say we've been doing this for a long time. This is the way it's been since we've been in the military for the 25, 30, 35 years that I've been in the Air National Guard. This problem's been there, and maybe so. Problem right now, to begin with, and the reason that we're here, is there's been some very high-profile cases that have brought this subject to the surface, and that's a good thing. We need to bring it up, we need to deal with it, and that's why we're here today. You've seen a lot of the cases in the news. If you've seen the documentary, The Invisible War, you look at some of these things and you just shake your head and you think, how could this possibly be happening in my organization? And most of us sitting right here today have an internal defense mechanism that says, those people are doing it. Those folks over there, it's not me, it's not us. But I hope you see as we go through today that it is part of our organization. It is part of our culture that we have to deal with if we're going to be able to correct this problem and provide justice and provide a viable Air National Guard into the future. When a sexual assault happens, there's a lot more ripple effect that goes on. To begin with, in the organization itself, how does sexual assault impact the Air National Guard? It's our moral obligation, that's the term wingmanship that I mean up there. Our moral obligation to take care of one another is at stake. All these different things, but the bottom line, the last two on that list right there, it affects our combat capability. We're sitting in a theater talking about this instead of making sure that the field units are getting the support that they need, because this has risen to the surface and needs to be addressed. And then in the long run, it has to do with our organizational viability. At some point, they're going to say, if this is what goes on in the organization, we're not going to fund it, we're not going to support it. Our reputation, our future are at stake with this particular problem. In some of your minds, to say it might not be real, it might be perception, but in this case, perception is reality. It doesn't matter. We're here. This is what we have to deal with right now. For the survivors, this is a threat. This is a risk. You just look at the ripple effects, once again, to the individuals that are involved in this, their family members, the marriages, all these types of things that pose a risk to our people. So this is what we're here to address and talk about today, and what we can hopefully do something about it. Now, to begin with, what is sexual assault? You heard me talk, if you were here for Wingman Day, we said, what's the difference between inappropriate relationships to a bad work environment with inappropriate, improper material, environment, whatever you want to say, to sexual harassment, all the way up to full-up sexual assault? Where do you draw this line on this spectrum of sexual assault as we were to look at it? And my point for the discussion today is, who cares? Wrong is wrong. One of these leads to the other. It provides an environment, it breeds, it allows this stuff to happen, it empowers it. So what we want to do is fix all of this. We can't just divorce one from the other. We can't just talk about the right side of this chart without addressing the left. One affects the other. So we're here to look at this. It's why we did the search that they did, the inspection of the work areas and everything else. It was simply trying to address part of this problem. Let's fix the problem to begin with. Let's not try and play like lawyers to figure out where we can draw the line between what's acceptable and what's not. Let's not talk about acceptable. Let's talk about right or wrong to deal with the topic. Now, hold with me for just a second. I'm going to give you a little bit of a theoretical discussion. Every single day we show up to work, we have our work environment. We have our relationships. We have our culture. Every single day that we show up, wherever there are problems with this, think of this as a shield that we have available to us. Wherever there are problems with this, wherever there are shortcomings, these are flaws. These are kink in our armor, holes in our shield that we have available to us. In our organizational standards, the things that we do every single day when we show up to work, where it's inappropriate, unprofessional, offensive, degrading, this sets the environment that we work in. The term latent means this is the way it is all the time. So this is our day-to-day work environment that we have. Next, I'm going to introduce this next layer. This is our supervisors. Do our supervisors do the things that supervisors are supposed to do? Are they proactive? Do they take care of problems when they happen? You're going to hear me come back to this term about just culture in a little bit. This means that if somebody does something wrong, if somebody else does something wrong, do they have the same sort of treatment? And if somebody is a victim, somebody's a victim over here from whatever it is, do they get the same sort of support? We need to make sure that it's a level playing field of equal opportunity for everybody in the organization. That's the job of supervision and leadership. That's our next layer of defense that we have. Then we have the preconditions. This is today when I show up to work. What are the conditions of the individuals? What are the circumstances that are going on? What are the type of support that I have available? What's the team dynamic? What's the relationships between the people? Once again, every time that there's a flaw in that, that gives us a vulnerability. And then last, we have our acts. These are the things that people do, exercising bad judgment, maybe completely violating the UCMJ or what we would consider appropriate behavior in some fashion. But somebody makes, I'll call it an error, a mistake, bad judgment. We have a tendency to focus on the acts a lot of times. My point is, for one of these acts to actually end up into a bad situation, we have to have a failure in these other modes first. In other words, we have the ability to break this whole chain of events back here in the process before we ever even get to the acts themselves. So I want to focus today on things that we can do day to day to be able to not insulate our organization from the vulnerabilities of people's fallibility to begin with. And there are concrete things that we can do. And that's what I'd like to talk about. This whole thing right here is, the point is that sexual assault is the consequence of the environment that we have set. It's not the cause. We're not here just to focus on that today. We have to look at it from the bigger picture because that's how it ends up happening. Here we are. Back to this. You've heard, if you were here for Wingman Day, we talk about core values. Because if you think about it, this is fundamental to how we solve a lot of the problems. To begin with, when we look at integrity, integrity, service, and excellence, for those of you who don't know the three. But here is one of our primary solutions that we have to sexual assault. Integrity itself, in your brain, you know what's right or wrong. This is called your character. If your actions accurately reflect, now your actions, what you do, does it accurately connect your brain to your actions? That cable that connects your character to your conduct is your integrity. In other words, do you do the same thing no matter who's watching? Do you have the same actions? Do you use the same words? Does it matter who's around? Do you change your behavior based on who's watching? If that's the case, there's a problem with your integrity. The example I use in safety all the time is, you know in your brain you're supposed to drive 55. What do you do when you drive by a cop? Most people take their foot off the gas because they're used to exceeding the known standards. They know that they're guilty most of the time. Usually in a room like this, I ask how many people have driven greater than 55 in a 55 zone. Okay, we've all done it. The point is that there's times and places. We can't just say integrity is such a simple thing. We have to look at it, we have to measure it. And one of the biggest things when it comes to integrity is, one of the toughest things is having somebody, you knowing when you're exceeding a speed limit, when you're having a problem, when you're having performance measures. The fundamental truth is most people don't know when their performance is being degraded, if there's something going on. The last person who's going to know if you have an integrity problem really is you. And a lot of times, to get into the scientific term, we talk about normalized deviance. Hang with that word for a second, but that just means that we've gotten used to something being wrong. And we now just think that's normal and okay. And I'll give you some very clear examples of that here in just a little bit. But we can't assess it. We have to have a wingman. We have to have somebody there to give us that feedback back that we're having problems, that we're having issues. So one of the problems to begin with goes back to what I was saying initially, is most people don't think of themselves as victims or survivors. Most people don't think of themselves as perpetrators in all this. But in reality, go read the newspaper stories. Go read people talking about folks that are in the news that have committed sexual assault. And they use phrases like, they're wonderful family people. They're great. Now, we're talking, this is bell curve. And the whole point of me bringing this up is that you can't look at somebody and tell. You just can't look at the surface and expect to be able to assess if somebody either has been a survivor of sexual assault or if they've committed sexual assault. There's some very high-profile cases where you look at, and a lot of times they're high-performance people. They've done a lot of great things. They're family people. And these descriptions of they would never do something like that. So we can't just tell. We have to be able to dig a little bit deeper to be able to find out. All right, let's get a little bit personal when it comes to the Air National Guard. Is this problem easier to deal with or tougher to deal with in the Air National Guard? We can throw up all the different things that we know, our demographics, our familiarity. We stay with people a long time. We grow up, my gosh, we have generations of the same people in the same units. Half the unit has the same last name. All these different types of things that we know in our unit, we're like a big family. So here's the trouble. When somebody in your family has done something wrong, what's our initial tendency? Protect them. Let's keep bad things from happening to our family. And it's a lot tougher to look in the mirror and see that there's a problem within our own organization. All right, so it's tougher in the Air National Guard. A lot of times in an active duty unit, if there's a problem, they PCA somebody. They send them to another unit. They just break up this whole relationship to begin with. We don't have that option. So in the Guard, we have unique challenges when it comes to dealing with sexual assault. So what makes people do the right thing? What makes somebody drive 55 in a 55 zone, to stick with that analogy? What's going to make us have to deal with appropriate behaviors in a proper work environment, not committing ultimately leading to sexual assault? There's three main pillars. The first is there has to be surveillance. There has to be somebody watching. There has to be the wingman there looking, the supervisor there checking. The second is when somebody does something good, we pat them on the back. When it comes to this problem, when somebody does something bad, we have to kick them in the butt. All right? So there's reward, there's punishment, and there's surveillance. These are the three main pillars that are going to drive organizational change and behavior management within an organization. So we have to get there. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that first one. What does surveillance mean? How do we bring this problem out into the open? All right, people are fallible, right? People make mistakes. So no matter what we do, we're going to end up where people are going to be exercising bad judgment, making bad decisions, doing wrong things at some point. Could be you, could be anybody in this organization. All right, so if we go with the assumption that people are fallible, people make mistakes, there's some things that we can do then as an enterprise to be able to insulate ourselves so that these fallible human beings, we never have to pay the price for their fallibility. And let me walk through that real quick. First, we have to define our priorities, what's important. And that's what we're starting with here today. We're having to come back and make sure that we are defining our priorities properly, and that's what we're here to talk about. But we want to design a workplace that even though people are fallible, people make mistakes, people make violations and do wrong things, that we never put people where one mistake, one bad decision ends up with an immediate and irreversible consequence. It is our job as an organization to set up a condition, a system, where if something bad happens, we catch it. In a simple three-tiered approach, and let me walk through three. To begin with, there are things that we can do to not make the violations to begin with. Hopefully, the person who's thinking about committing sexual assault, not knowing it, inappropriate behaviors is going to stop. There's a lot of things we can do to raise our performance, if you will, from a level of good to a level of excellence. So we're going to start by doing that. And we do that by the things we're doing here today. Education, awareness, talking about this, making people realize that maybe what they're doing is not right, changing those behaviors. Where we can't change the individual's behaviors, the next step, we want to set up a series of checks and balances. This is going to be we're taking the wingman accountability to one another. Bystander intervention. This is where somebody does something that's not right, somebody else calls them on it, if you will. Having that moral fortitude to stand up to somebody when they're doing something wrong and say, not me, not here, not today. And then if something bad happens, the last part of this little pyramid, I say the term mitigate the consequences, and all I mean by that is if something bad happens, let's make sure it doesn't happen again. And the best thing we can do is that very top line right there to begin with, is if there is somebody that's assaulted, they get justice. They're not the ones that have to pay for it. The one who did the assault does. And if you look out there right now, that's simply not the case, and we need to be able to change that. So if something bad happens, we want to make sure that it doesn't happen again. And that's a lot of what you're hearing in the news in terms of legislation, in terms of the processes that we use once we identify that something bad has happened. This is our whole response and prevention spectrum that we have. It's like anything else. There's not one answer that's going to solve this. I can't point to one thing. In this building, how do we keep people from getting burned up in a fire? There's lots of different things that we do. We make sure that we design the buildings right. They have exits. We have signs here. We have alarms. There's not one answer. And the same thing is true for this answer for sexual assault. There are many, many things that we're going to do to be able to protect our people. There's many layers that we can stack on top of one another. The next core value, service before self. My definition, right there, the rational preoccupation with the preciousness of others. Rational, not irrational. All right, so the rational preoccupation. How many people do you think commit sexual assault are thinking about the needs of the person that they're committing against? All right, no, they're completely selfish at that point, thinking about what's in this for me, how am I going to handle it? So you have to realize that sexual assault by its very nature is contrary to our foundational beliefs as an organization. It goes against our core values. So we have to look at it. We have to stop it. We have to make sure that when it does happen, that it doesn't happen again. Excellence, the last of the three pillars we're going to talk about, simply means that if you're a company and you're building something, you're going to get more efficient over time. If we're an organization, we're going to get better at what we do over time. If you're looking at safety metrics, we're going to get safer over time. That once we set the standard, we're simply going to raise that bar and keep going and keep improving. So excellence in everything that we do. Pick any occupation, pick anything that you want. That simply is occupational safety. What, rates of when people used to get hurt. What happens over time? We've gotten better. And I can pick out almost anything that we do, any industry, any occupation that you want, and I'm going to be able to show you something similar to this. In the Air National Guard, from a safety standpoint, this is us versus the active duty. The active duty is this blue line, we're this red line. You can see back in history that we used to crash a lot more airplanes and hurt a lot more people. At one point, we had this statistical crossover, and now to this date, we're actually twice as good. So what happened from going twice as bad to twice as good? We had a wake-up moment in the early 1990s. We crashed a lot of airplanes. We realized that there was something drastically wrong with the way that we did business. General Shepard at the time says, hey, listen, we need to focus on what's going on. We need to have leadership accountability, and the term that he used a lot at that point was accountability. We instituted some changes, and this is not a statistical anomaly. Right? There's a lot of things that happened in the organization at this time, but we changed. We changed as a culture, we changed as an organization to where we are today. We went from being the flying club to the ones who set the standard of the way that it should be done. What happened and how did we get there? Well, from the purpose of what we're talking about today with sexual assault, we're right here, right now. We're at that decision moment of where are we going to go in the future, and the things that we do of whether we're going to set this bar of excellence as we continue to go out for the future years, to set it for our children, for future generations. What is the Air National Guard going to be 10 or 20 years from now? And that's what we're going to be talking about today, and we have the ability to influence. So we're at this crossover point here, hopefully going for a great future. Now, when we talk about excellence, there's things that we used to do that were okay. I can tell you right now, when I joined the military, 1980s, early 1980s, there are things that we did at that point that I think about today, and I'm just appalled that I would ever even do that. But it was accepted behavior back then. And I see the smirks in the room. You all know exactly what I'm talking about. The things that were okay then are no longer okay now. Not just in your eyes, but you would know it. You would feel that it's not right. But at the time, that was that normalized deviancy, that was accepted behavior. So part of the problem is we have a lot of the folks in the room who grew up in this is the way it used to be. Well, the trouble is that can't be okay for the future as we move forward. As we look at being an excellent organization, how are we going to improve? I mean, just think about it. I mean, when I joined in the 1980s, we still carpet bombed, and we had, airplanes that would go out and launch nuclear rockets, unguided rockets at the waves of bombers coming at us. That's the approach. That's our organization. That's how we went about doing business. It's not the way we go about doing business now. Our organization has changed. The way we're structured has changed. Our approach to things have changed. The way we do our job day to day has fundamentally changed. Well, why shouldn't we take that same approach to how we do our internal business, how we take care of ourselves domestically and internally as an organization? One of the most important things that we have available to us is your ability to talk. To paraphrase the quote, it says the tongue is small, but it shifts the whole body. It changes the whole body. What I mean by that is your words, small words, can make a big difference in the vector of the organization and where we're going. So we have to think about the things that we say. For you walking out of here today, one of the most important tools that you have available is what you say and who you say it to. It's a powerful tool that we need to use very wisely. For those of you that were here for Wingman Day, you heard me use this before. It simply is called the Pygmalion effect. Things we say, things we do are going to affect how people view us. That changes our belief about ourselves or about other people. That's going to change our actions and eventually our own self-perception, which is then going to change our behavior. This whole circle right here simply says if you tell somebody they're good, they're going to think that they're good, they're going to believe that they're good, eventually they're going to be good. If you tell somebody just the opposite, it has that same effect. You have a lot of power with your words to be able to affect people's behaviors. And all I'm trying to say is, let's talk about this. Talking about sexual assault and bringing it out in the open is one of the most powerful tools that we have available to us. The medical people will use the term, they talk about the antiseptic effects of light, bringing something out of the darkness into the light so that we can now see what the problem is. Sexual assault only thrives in an organization where it's hidden, where you don't talk about it, where you don't know about it, and people can't deal with it. So let's bring it out into the light, let's bring it out into the open, and let's talk about it, because that's going to help solve it. You don't know about it in your organization, your division, your directorate. If you start opening and talking about it, I think you're going to find out. It's amazing what's been hiding in the dark in that organization. And that's part of what we're going to deal with when we do our organizational breakouts talking about sexual assault. Here's the deal. Everybody in the room here today has a role in this. You can talk, you can get involved, you can help make an answer to this, even if you don't have anything to do with or any clue that sexual assaults happened in the organization. The good news is you can be part of the answer to it by helping us do these things that we're talking about today. All right. There was a talk I would love to give to you all, but I actually found a video that does it way, way better than I possibly could. So I want to show you a short video clip right here. Now, this is not the U.S. military. In this particular case, those of you who have seen it, this is an Australian general just from a couple weeks ago who made this video clip. Supervisors, leaders, you want to know how to talk to your people about sexual assault? Do it like this. Hit it.
Earlier today, I addressed the media, and through them the Australian public, about ongoing investigations into a group of officers and NCOs whose conduct, if proven, has not only brought the Australian Army into disrepute, but has let down every one of you and all of those whose past service has won the respect of our nation. There are limits to how much I can tell you because the investigations into this network by both the New South Wales Police and the ADF Investigative Service are ongoing. But evidence collected to date has identified a group of men within our ranks who have allegedly produced highly inappropriate material, demeaning women, and distributed it across the internet and Defence's email networks. If this is true, then the actions of these members are in direct contravention to every value the Australian Army stands for. By now, I assume you know my attitude to this type of conduct. I have stated categorically many times that the Army has to be an inclusive organisation in which every soldier, man and woman, is able to reach their full potential and is encouraged to do so. Those who think that it is okay to behave in a way that demeans or exploits their colleagues have no place in this Army. Our service has been engaged in continuous operations since 1999 and in its longest war ever in Afghanistan. On all operations, female soldiers and officers have proven themselves worthy of the best traditions of the Australian Army. They are vital to us maintaining our capability now and into the future. If that does not suit you, then get out. You may find another employer where your attitude and behaviour is acceptable, but I doubt it. The same goes for those who think that toughness is built on humiliating others. Every one of us is responsible for the culture and reputation of our Army and the environment in which we work. If you become aware of any individual degrading another, then show moral courage and take a stand against it. No one has ever explained to me how the exploitation or degradation of others enhances capability or honours the traditions of the Australian Army. I will be ruthless in ridding the Army of people who cannot live up to its values, and I need every one of you to support me in achieving this. The standard you walk past is the standard you accept. That goes for all of us, but especially those who by their rank have a leadership role. If we are a great national institution, if we care about the legacy left to us by those who have served before us, if we care about the legacy we leave to those who, in turn, will protect and secure Australia, then it is up to us to make a difference. If you're not up to it, find something else to do with your life. There is no place for you amongst this band of brothers and sisters.
That's about as straight talk as you can get. Every time I watch that, speak it. So why is this important to you? One of the challenges General Williams said when he came up here was, what kind of legacy do we want to have? Now, folks in the room, I'm a dad. How many folks have a family? General Williams talked about his kids. Do you want your children to be in this environment that we've created, in this organization that goes forward? Do we want to be able to entrust this? Now, let me get just personal for a second, okay? That's my daughter. I would love for her to be able to join the Air National Guard. But the question is, right now, I question whether that's a smart move and whether I would let her or dissuade her from doing that as a father. There are things we need to be able to do so that we can make an organization that's viable, that's safe for our people. Every single person here deserves a safe, non-hostile work environment. Everybody has the same opportunity to exceed, to be able to excel, to achieve. We need to be able to do that. And I would like my daughter, if she wanted, isn't that the cutest picture, by the way, to be able to be a future guardsman. Right now, that's at risk. Everybody in this room has the opportunity to influence our organization for the better. So that's my challenge as we go forward today is, what can we do? I hope we've given some tools. As I said before, if you came in here and you walk out and it doesn't make any difference to you, I apologize for wasting your time. Hopefully we're going to walk out of here with some concrete things that you can do to be able to make a difference in the organization. Okay? It's a threat to our future viability as an organization, but there are concrete things that we can do. You have the right to a safe work environment. If it's not safe, speak up. We have the folks down here, and the wing commander talked about who you can talk to right now. And you've got the pledge from our leadership that said they're going to support you. So let's make our work environment now what it needs to be. If in doubt, any situation, simply take a step back and think about integrity, service, excellence. Does what I'm doing, what I'm thinking, what's going on right here measure up to those core values that we adhere to as an organization? If not, stop it. Don't. Doing nothing's not an option. Being quiet is letting the problem persist. I'm asking you to be proactive. Like I said, even if it's never been a problem, you have no clue that it's going on around you, talk about it. Help us deal with it now to bring this stuff out into the light so that we can solve the problem. The problem is not the victims. The problem is not the survivors. It's our organization, the climate and the culture that we create. Speak up, do something about it. You have a role, and I hope that's at least a good message as we walk out of here today. It's a very tough subject. It's an uncomfortable subject, all right? But we're talking about our legacy, what we're leaving to the future generations, what we're going to do with the Air National Guard as we go into the future, whether we're going to still be that viable, great organization that we are today as we move forward. What's next? We're going to do directorate breakouts. We're not doing them today. Your directors are going to get a ConOps that's going to talk about how we're going to do face-to-face briefings as individual directorates. Your director will tell you when you're going to do that. It's not today. It'll be sometime over the next few weeks. We'll have the time to be able to look at some other media, talk about things, and help address some of these issues. You're going to be getting future guidance on that. It's not today. We're done when we leave here today. You go back to work. We are going to be developing sexual assault training for the Air National Guard for the future. If you want to be part of that, you want to give us some inputs, you'd like to participate, let me know. We would be glad to take your inputs and make you part of the solution for the long term when it comes to how we're going to develop training. Talk to me, talk to Colonel Lanuzzo, be part of the solution. Come on down, join the team. Let's all work on this together. We would love your inputs. That being said, our wrap up for today, if you're very uncomfortable, folks in the room here today, if you need help, the people in the t-shirts right here are the people that you need to go to. They're your go-to people. If not, talk to a leader, commander, or anybody else up here, but please talk about it. Let's help you solve the problems of that. That being said, hack. There's your 1 hour. Thank you all so much for your time. Have a wonderful rest of your day.